At Christmas dinner, my daughter-in-law whispered, "You weren't invited. Paying the bills doesn't make you
Then I
family."
hope you can pay the $8,000
I took a
that are
sip
due
of wine
tomorrow.
and calmly said, "Then I hope you can pay the
Who
$8,000
invited him?
that are due tomorrow." The dining room glowed with warm candlelight, casting dancing shadows across the mahogany table I'd bought 3 years ago when Rebecca had insisted on the expensive one from that fancy furniture store downtown. "It needs to look right for our guests," she'd said back then. And like always, I'd written the check without question. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, mixed with the scent of pine from the 12-foot Christmas tree that dominated the living room corner, another expense I'd covered, of course. I sat at what Rebecca called the head of the table, though it felt more like being positioned for display than honor. Michael, my son, carved the turkey with practiced precision, while Rebecca fluttered around adjusting place settings and ensuring everything met her standards of perfection. Their friends, the Hendersons, sat across from me along with Rebecca's sister Martha and her husband. Everyone laughed and chatted, the wine flowing freely as conversation bounced from vacation plans to home renovations. "George has been so generous with helping us with the house updates," Rebecca announced to the table, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound grateful, but somehow made it feel like an obligation. We couldn't have afforded the new kitchen without him. The table murmured appreciative sounds, but I noticed how she phrased it. Not, "My father-in-law helped us," or "George chose to help us." Just stating a fact like mentioning the weather. I took another sip of wine, watching Michael nod along with his wife's words. When had my son stopped looking me in the eye during these conversations? When had he started treating my presence at family gatherings like something to be endured rather than enjoyed? The conversation moved on to other topics, but I found myself drifting, remembering how different things used to be. After Sarah died 4 years ago, I'd thrown myself into supporting Michael and Rebecca. They were struggling with their mortgage. Rebecca wasn't working while pursuing her real estate license, and they had dreams of starting a family. I'd been happy to help, believing that's what fathers do, what family does. But somewhere along the way, my help had transformed from generous gestures into expected contributions. The monthly mortgage assistance became automatic. The utility bills started coming to my address. When their car broke down, they didn't ask if I could help with a loan. They asked which dealership I preferred for the financing. "Dad, could you pass the wine?" Michael's voice pulled me back to the present. I reached for the bottle, noting how he called me Dad in front of guests, but barely acknowledged me when we were alone. Rebecca was telling Martha about their plans for a summer vacation to Europe, describing hotel suites and restaurant reservations with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about the cost because someone else would handle it. "That sounds expensive," Martha commented with a laugh. "Oh, we'll manage," Rebecca replied with a wave of her hand. "George always makes sure we're taken care of." There it was again. That phrase that made my stomach twist, not "we're grateful for George's support," or "George chooses to help us," just the assumption that I would, that I should, that it was my responsibility to ensure their comfort. I excused myself to use the bathroom, needing a moment away from the table. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear Rebecca's voice carrying from the dining room. "He's been so good to us," she was saying. "I don't know what we'd do without him." The words should have warmed my heart, but something in her tone made me pause. I stood in the hallway, listening. "You're lucky to have him," I heard Martha reply. "Oh, we are," Rebecca continued, "though honestly sometimes I think he gets more out of it than we do. You know how lonely he's been since Sarah passed. Having us around gives him purpose." My chest tightened. Is that how she saw it? That I paid their bills because I was lonely and desperate for their company? The weight of her words pressed against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. For years I had believed I was being supportive, being family. But to her, I was just a sad
revealed all of the cards. The documents David had provided were comprehensive and damning. Photographs of Rebecca meeting with Attorney Webb 4 separate times over the past 2 months. Email exchanges discussing how to document my supposed cognitive decline. Draft legal filings seeking emergency guardianship based on fabricated instances of confusion and financial mismanagement.
But the text messages between Rebecca and Michael hurt the most. Reading them felt like someone was twisting a knife in my chest. "Do you think he suspects anything?" Rebecca had asked. "No, he doesn't have a clue. He still thinks we're one big happy family," Michael had replied. "Good. Keep it that way until everything's in place. We don't want him getting spooked and changing his will before we can file." My son, my only child, the person I'd raised, loved, supported through every stage of his life. How had it come to this? When had he become someone who could casually discuss deceiving his father for financial gain? I flipped through more messages, each one more painful than the last. Rebecca detailing her plans to have me declared incompetent. Michael expressing minor doubts, but ultimately agreeing to go along with it. Both of them discussing which nursing facility would be best for me, with Rebecca noting that one in particular had great security to prevent residents from leaving without permission. They hadn't just been planning to take my money. They'd been planning to imprison me, to lock me away and throw away the key while they enjoyed the fruits of my lifetime of work. The pain was almost unbearable. I'd lost Sarah 4 years ago, and now I was losing my son too. Not to death, but to something worse, to greed and betrayal. At least with death, you could cling to the good memories, could tell yourself that the love had been real. But this poisoned everything, made me question every moment, every memory, every seemingly loving gesture. Had Michael ever really loved me? Or had I just been a resource to him, a convenience, a bank account with a pulse? Had all the times he'd said he loved me, all the Father's Day cards, all the birthday celebrations just been a performance to keep the money flowing? I picked up a framed photo from my nightstand, Michael at his college graduation arm around my shoulder, both of us smiling broadly. Had that smile been genuine, or had he already been calculating what he could get from me? The anger that had sustained me downstairs began to ebb, replaced by a grief so profound it threatened to drown me. I'd already lost my wife. Now I was losing my son too. Soon I would truly be alone in the world. But as I sat there, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, something strange happened. The grief didn't consume me. Instead, it clarified things. The truth hurt. It hurt like hell, but it was still the truth. And the truth was setting me free. For years I'd been living in a fantasy, believing I was part of a loving family, when in reality, I was just being used. Now I knew better. Now I could make decisions based on reality instead of illusion. And that was a kind of freedom I hadn't experienced in a long time. I heard a knock at my door, soft, hesitant, Michael, not Rebecca. I could tell from the way he knocked, 3 gentle taps, just like he used to do when he was a boy. "Dad?" Can I talk to you?" His voice sounded strained, almost broken. Part of me wanted to tell him to go away to spare myself more pain. But another part, the part that had been his father for 34 years, couldn't turn him away. Not yet. Not without hearing what he had to say. "Come in." He entered slowly, cautiously, like someone approaching a wounded animal. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face haggard. He looked like he'd aged years in the few hours since our confrontation downstairs. "Dad, I need you to believe me." I didn't know what Rebecca was planning. I mean, not all of it. I knew she was concerned about your health, about what would happen if you got sick. But I never imagined. His voice trailed off as he saw the text messages spread across my bed. Messages in his own words, agreeing to Rebecca's plan, discussing which nursing home would be most suitable for warehousing his father. "You never imagined what?" I asked, my voice deliberately neutral. "Never imagined that I'd find out. Never imagined that I'd have evidence of what you were planning, or never imagined that your own father would fight back against being robbed of his dignity and autonomy." Michael sank into the chair by the window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "I don't know what to say. I've been a fool. Rebecca has been talking for months about your memory issues, about how you sometimes get confused. Little things at first, forgetting where you put your keys, missing appointments. Then bigger things, getting lost, driving to the store, putting salt in your coffee. I believed her because it was easier to believe I was declining than to consider your wife might be lying," I suggested. He nodded miserably. "And because, if you were declining, it made sense to think about what would happen next. Who would make decisions for you? How your assets would be managed." "My assets," I repeated. "Always back to my money, isn't it?" "It wasn't just about the money, Dad. At least that's not how Rebecca presented it. She made it sound like we were protecting you, making sure you were taken care of. She said if we didn't step in, you might make bad financial decisions, might get taken advantage of by someone else." The irony was almost comical. Someone else, as opposed to being taken advantage of by my own son and daughter-in-law. Michael flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I deserve that. I deserve worse. I just want you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to put you away somewhere. But you were willing to go along with it," I said. "You were willing to sit in a courtroom and testify that I was incompetent if Rebecca told you it was necessary." He couldn't meet my eyes. I trusted her judgment. I believed her when she said you were getting worse, that you needed intervention, even though you lived in the same house and never saw any evidence of this supposed decline yourself. She said it happened when I wasn't around, that you hid it from me because you were embarrassed. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive myself. But please believe that I never wanted to cause you pain. I never wanted to betray you like this." I looked at my son, this man I had raised from infancy, this person who shared my blood, my name, my history. I wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that he'd been manipulated by Rebecca, that he wasn't fully complicit in the plot to steal my life. But the evidence before me told a different story. Michael, for the past 3 years, you've lived in my house, driven cars. I paid for eaten food. I bought all without contributing anything significant to our household expenses. You've watched me pay your mortgage, your utilities, your credit cards. You've planned European vacations with money you knew would come from me. And in all that time, did you ever once think about what you were taking? Did you ever consider that maybe, just maybe, you were taking advantage of your father's generosity? He swallowed hard. I guess I thought you wanted to help us, that it made you happy to be able to support us. And it did at first. But somewhere along the way, my help became your entitlement. My generosity became your expectation. And when Rebecca suggested that I might someday stop being your personal ATM, you were willing to consider having me declared incompetent to ensure the cash flow continued. It wasn't like that, he protested weakly. Then what was it like? Michael, explain it to me. Help me understand how my son could be party to a plan to strip me of my legal rights, my freedom, my dignity. He was crying now, with tears streaming down his face, unchecked. I don't know, Dad. I don't know how it got this far. It started with small things, Rebecca suggesting we needed a new car, a kitchen renovation, a vacation. You always seemed happy, to help, proud even. Then it became routine, expected. And somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about where the money came from. I just assumed it would always be there. And when Rebecca told you I was losing my mind, that I needed to be controlled for my own good, I believed her because it was convenient to believe her, he admitted, his voice breaking. Because if you were incompetent, then we could keep living the way we'd been living without having to feel guilty about it. We could tell ourselves we were protecting you while we spent your money. The honesty was refreshing, at least. After months of deception, hearing my son acknowledge the ugly truth felt like a small victory. Michael, do you know what the penalty is for financial exploitation of an elderly person in this state? For conspiracy to commit fraud, for filing false documents with the court, because those are the charges Rebecca would be facing if I decided to go to the police with what I've discovered. His face went pale. You wouldn't do that. Not to Rebecca, not to your daughter-in-law. Wouldn't I? She was planning to have me declared incompetent based on fabricated evidence. She was going to put me in a nursing home against my will so she could control my assets. Why shouldn't I make her face the legal consequences of her actions? Because it would destroy our family, he said desperately. Because despite everything, we're still family. I considered his words, turning them over in my mind. Family. The word had meant so much to me once, had driven so many of my decisions over the years. But what did it really mean now? Rebecca told me last night that paying the bills doesn't make me family, I said quietly. I've been thinking about that a lot, about what family really means. And I've come to the conclusion that she was right. Paying bills doesn't make us family. But you know what else doesn't make us family? Plotting to steal from each other, lying to each other, treating each other as means to an end rather than as people deserving of dignity and respect. "Dad, please," Michael begged. "We can fix this. We can make it right. Can we? Because from where I'm sitting, some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep. Some trust, once broken, can never be fully restored. You're saying you'll never forgive me, that you're just going to cut me out of your life completely." The pain in his voice was genuine. I could tell, but so was mine. "I'm saying that forgiveness isn't something you're entitled to, Michael. It's something you earn. And right now, you haven't even begun to earn it. Tell me what to do," he pleaded. "Tell me how to make this right. I'll do anything." Start by moving out," I said firmly. "Start by standing on your own 2 feet. Start by living within your means instead of depending on me to bankroll your lifestyle. Start by being the man I raised you to be, not the person you've become. And then, if I do all that, then we'll see. I can't make any promises beyond that." Michael nodded slowly, accepting my terms. "And Rebecca? What about her? That's between you and her, but I want her out of my house, and I want her out of my life. Whatever relationship you choose to have with her, going forward, is your business, but don't expect me to welcome her back with open arms. Some bridges, once burned, stay burned." "I understand," he said softly. "For what it's worth, I am truly sorry. Not just for getting caught, but for betraying your trust, for failing to be the son you deserved." His words hit me harder than I had expected. Despite everything, he was still my son. Still the boy I'd taught to throw a baseball, to ride a bike, to drive a car. Still the young man I'd proudly watched graduate from college. Still Sarah's child, carrying her smile, her laugh, her mannerisms. "I know you are," I said, my voice gentler than before. "That's the only reason we're having this conversation. But being sorry isn't enough, Michael. You need to change. You need to become someone worthy of trust, and that's going to take time, a lot of time. I'm willing to put in the work," he said, and for the first time in our conversation, I heard determination in his voice. "I want to be worthy of being your son again." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The emotions churning inside me were too complex, too contradictory. Anger and love, betrayal and hope, disappointment and pride, all tangled together in a knot that would take time to unravel. "You should go pack," I said finally. "You have until tomorrow evening." "Where will we go?" "That's for you to figure out. You're an adult, Michael. It's time you started acting like one." He stood up, hesitated, then moved toward the door. "Dad," he said, pausing with his hand on the doorknob, "I do love you, despite everything, despite my mistakes. I just wanted you to know that." Before I could respond, he was gone, closing the door softly behind him. I sat there in the gathering darkness, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. Did he love me? Maybe, in his own way. But he'd loved my money more, loved the lifestyle it provided more, loved the comfort and security it represented more. And that was a reality I would have to learn to live with. Outside my window, The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It would be Christmas night soon, a time for family, for togetherness, for celebration. But this year, my celebration would be different. This year, I would be celebrating my freedom, my independence, my refusal to be used and discarded by the people who should have loved me most. It wasn't the Christmas I had expected, but perhaps it was the Christmas I needed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions, new beginnings. But tonight, I would sit with the truth, painful as it was, and let it strengthen me for the journey ahead. I woke up the next morning to the sound of activity downstairs. Doors opening and closing, hushed arguments, the occasional thud of something heavy being moved. Michael and Rebecca were packing, preparing to leave the house they'd assumed would always be available to them. I lay in bed for a while, listening to the sounds of their departure. There was a hollowness in my chest, where anger had burned so hot the day before. The righteous fury that had sustained me through confrontation had receded, leaving behind a quieter, more complicated emotion, not quite grief, not quite relief, but something in between. A solemn acknowledgement that something significant was ending, and something else, as yet undefined, was beginning. The clock on my nightstand showed 7:15 a.m. Despite everything that had happened yesterday, the shocking discovery of Rebecca's guardianship plot, the confrontation with my son, the painful realization that I'd been living with people who were actively plotting to steal my freedom, I'd slept soundly. Perhaps because for the first time in years, I was acting from a place of truth rather than illusion. There was a certain peace in that, even amid the pain. I made my coffee in the small machine I had bought for my bedroom and watched through my window as Michael loaded Beanses into his car. Rebecca was nowhere to be seen, probably still inside gathering more of their belongings. They were leaving earlier than my deadline, eager to escape the uncomfortable reality of what they'd done, what they'd planned to do. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Moving company confirmed for 7 p.m. Locksmith scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. How are you holding up? I typed back a brief response. Surviving. We'll call later. The house felt different already, as if the very air was changing with the knowledge that soon I would be its sole occupant again. I'd been living here for 3 years, ever since selling my own home to help Michael and Rebecca with their down payment. But despite paying the mortgage, despite occupying the master bedroom, I'd never truly felt this was my home. It had always been their space, that they permitted me to share their domain, where I existed on the periphery. That would change now. This house, with its expensive mahogany dining table, its carefully selected furnishings, its manicured lawn that I paid a service $300 a month to maintain, would become truly mine. Not just financially, but in every sense that mattered. By mid-morning, I decided to venture downstairs. I couldn't hide in my room forever, and there were practical matters to discuss before they left keys to collect accounts to separate final arrangements to make. The living room was a maze of boxes and suitcases, the physical manifestation of their hasty departure. Rebecca was in the kitchen wrapping glasses in newspaper and placing them carefully in a box. She looked up when I entered. Her face, a complex mixture of emotions, anger, shame, defiance, fear. We're almost done, she said stiffly. We're taking only what we brought with us, or bought ourselves. Yeah. I nodded, noting that her definition of what they had bought themselves seemed generous given that most of their purchases over the past 3 years had been made with my money. But I didn't challenge her. Some battles weren't worth fighting, and I had already won the war. "Where's Michael?" I asked, pouring myself another cup of coffee. "Picking up a rental truck. We can't fit everything in our cars." Rebecca didn't meet my eyes as she continued wrapping glasses. "He should be back soon." The silence between us stretched taut, with unspoken accusations and justifications. For 3 years we had lived under the same roof, shared meals, celebrated holidays, existed in the intimate proximity that only family shares. And all that time, she had been plotting against me, documenting my supposed decline, preparing to strip me of my autonomy. Why Rebecca? The question escaped before I could reconsider. Was it really just about the money? She stopped wrapping her hands, going still around a wine glass. One I'd bought, ironically, to celebrate their housewarming 3 years ago. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." Rebecca set the glass down carefully, finally turning to face me. "Do you know what it's like to grow up with nothing? To watch your parents count pennies at the grocery store? To wear the same 3 outfits to school until the other kids start noticing and making comments?" I remained silent, letting her continue. "I promised myself I would never live that way as an adult, never worry about whether I could afford to go to the doctor, never have to choose between paying the electric bill or buying groceries." Her voice hardened. "And then I met Michael, and he told me about his successful father, his comfortable childhood, the inheritance he would someday receive. It seemed perfect." "So you married my son for his expected inheritance?" The coldness in my voice surprised even me. "I married Michael because I loved him," she shot back. "The financial security was just a bonus. But then Sarah died, and suddenly you were inserting yourself into our lives, offering money, paying bills, taking over. And yes, at first it was a relief. But then it became clear that you weren't just helping. You were controlling. Everything came with strings attached with expectations." "What expectations?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "When did I ever ask for anything in return?" "You didn't have to ask. It was implied. The expectation that we'd include you in our social events, that we'd spend holidays with you instead of my family, that we'd consult you on decisions about our home, a home that increasingly felt like it belonged more to you than to us." The irony of her complaint wasn't lost on me. The home does belong more to me than to you, Rebecca. I put the down payment on it. I've been paying the mortgage for 3 years. Your name isn't even on the deed. See? That's exactly what I mean. You hold your financial contributions over our heads like a weapon. Like we should be grateful that you've decided to play benefactor. Her voice cracked slightly. "Do you have any idea what that feels like? To be constantly reminded that your comfort, your security, your very roof over your head depends on someone else's continued goodwill." For a moment, I almost felt sympathy for her. Almost understood how my help, however well-intentioned, might have created a dynamic of dependency and resentment. But then I remembered the nursing home brochures, the fabricated evidence, the plot to have me declared incompetent. So your solution was to have me declared mentally incompetent, to take control of my assets, so you wouldn't have to depend on my goodwill anymore. She looked away. It wasn't like that. Not at first. We were genuinely concerned about your memory, your decision-making. Lies you invented and then convinced Michael were true. Not entirely. Rebecca's eyes met mine, defiant now. You have been forgetting things. Small things, maybe, but noticeable. The name of Michael's boss, where you put your reading glasses, the date of your doctor's appointment. Normal, everyday forgetfulness that happens to everyone, I countered. Not signs of cognitive decline requiring legal intervention. Maybe, but it gave us a starting point. And then she trailed off, seemingly reluctant to continue. And then you realized you could use it to gain control of my money. I finished for her. To secure your financial future once and for all. Rebecca didn't deny it. We would have taken care of you, she said quietly. Made sure you were comfortable, had everything you needed. While living in my house and spending my money, I added. How generous. The sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway interrupted our conversation. Michael was back with the rental truck. Rebecca resumed packing glasses. We'll be gone by noon, she said, her voice flat. You'll have what you wanted, your house to yourself, your money safely under your control, and the satisfaction of knowing you've made your only son homeless. Michael is not homeless, I corrected. He's an employed adult who now has to pay for his own housing, like millions of other adults in this country. That's not a tragedy, Rebecca. That's normal life. She didn't respond, her movements becoming more brisk, more aggressive, as she wrapped the remaining glasses. I left her to it, retreating to my study, to avoid the awkwardness of watching them load their belongings into the truck. Through the window, I could see Michael directing the moving process, his face set in a determined expression. I recognized from his childhood the same look he'd worn when tackling a difficult homework assignment or preparing for a sports competition. The sun I'd raised was still in there, somewhere beneath the entitlement and poor choices. That realization brought a fresh wave of grief. I wasn't just losing a son who had betrayed me. I was losing the son I'd loved, the boy who had once looked up to me, the young man who had made me proud. That person still existed, still shared my blood and my name. But our relationship had been fundamentally altered, perhaps irreparably. I thought of Sarah, then wondering what she would make of all this. Would she understand my decision to cut ties? Would she defend Michael? Urge reconciliation? Or would she be as devastated as I was by his willingness to participate in Rebecca's scheme? Sarah had always been the heart of our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts, who helped us understand each other. Without her, Michael and I had drifted into this cold, transactional relationship where money had replaced genuine connection. The loading continued throughout the morning. By noon, as promised, they were finishing up. I steeled myself and went downstairs one last time before their departure. Some things needed to be said, some closure needed to be achieved before we went our separate ways. Michael was standing in the living room surveying the space to ensure they hadn't forgotten anything essential. He turned when he heard my footsteps, his expression guarded. We're almost done, he said. Just a few more trips to the truck. I nodded, taking in the emptier room, the spaces where their personal items had been. Before you go, we should discuss practical matters. I'll need your house keys, garage door openers, and any credit cards issued on my accounts. He dug into his pocket and produced a key ring, removing several keys before handing them to me. House keys, mailbox, garage, side door, he said mechanically. The garage opener is in my car. I'll get it before we leave. And the credit cards. He pulled out his wallet, extracted 3 cards, and placed them on the coffee table. These are the ones you pay for. I've already removed them from my online accounts. Thank you, I said, my voice equally formal. I've already started the process of removing you as an authorized user on all my accounts. The utilities will remain on, since they're in my name, but you should set up new accounts at your new place immediately. He nodded, his gaze drifting around the room, lingering on the family photos that still adorned the mantel pictures of happier times when we had been a real family, not this broken facsimile. Dad, I know you're still angry, and you have every right to be, but I hope someday what, Michael? That we can pretend this never happened, that I can forget you were willing to have me declared incompetent based on your wife's lies. No, he said quietly. Not forget, but maybe forgive, eventually. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of the boy I'd raised, the man I'd hoped he would become. There were traces in the set of his jaw, the directness of his gaze, but clouded now by choices I couldn't understand or condone. I don't know if forgiveness is possible, Michael. But I do know the path forward, whatever it looks like, has to be based on truth and respect, not manipulation and entitlement. I understand, he said, though I wondered if he truly did. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just for what almost happened, but for the last 3 years. For taking you for granted. For accepting your help without appreciation. For not being the son you deserved. His words sounded sincere, but I'd learned the hard way that sincerity could be feigned, that the people closest to you could harbor secret agendas behind their smiles. Trust, once broken, was not easily restored. Actions speak louder than words, Michael. If you're truly sorry, show it by how you live from this point forward. Show it by becoming someone worthy of trust again. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, keys in hand. The truck is loaded. We should go if we want to make it to Martha's before dark. So they were staying with her sister, the same Martha who had sat at my dining table just 2 nights ago, commenting on how lucky they were to have me. I wondered what version of events they had shared with her, whether she knew the full truth of what they had planned, or if she had been fed a carefully edited story that cast me as the villain. Your sister is taking you in, I asked, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. Rebecca's chin lifted defiantly. Temporarily, until we find a place of our own. Good luck with that, I said, not unkindly. The rental market is challenging right now. Michael cleared his throat. We should get going. The truck is due back by 5. An awkward silence fell. This was it, the moment of departure. The severing of ties. The end of our life as a family unit, however dysfunctional that unit had been. None of us seemed to know quite how to navigate this final interaction. Take care of yourselves, I said finally, breaking the impasse. Despite everything, I don't wish you ill. Michael nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. You too, Dad. Take care. I watched through the front window. As they climbed into the rental truck, Michael behind the wheel, Rebecca in the passenger seat. They didn't look back as they pulled away from the curb and drove down the street, the truck and their two cars, forming a small caravan of departure. And just like that, they were gone. The house was mine alone now, quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. I stood in the empty living room, feeling the silence settle around me like a physical presence. No sounds of Rebecca cooking in the kitchen, no murmur of Michael's voice on the phone, no television playing in the background. Just the tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, marking the passage of time in a house that suddenly felt both too large and too empty. I spent the rest of the day in a strange limbo, moving through rooms that were simultaneously familiar and foreign. Everything looked the same. The furniture was still there. The artwork still hung on the walls. The books still lined the shelves, but the energy had changed completely. This was no longer a house where I lived as a tolerated guest. It was my house now in every sense of the word. David called that evening, checking in. The moving company is still scheduled for 7, he confirmed. They'll take inventory of everything that remains and store whatever you don't want to keep. Thank you, I said, realizing I hadn't given much thought to what I wanted to do with all the furnishings. I'll need to decide what stays and what goes. No rush on that. The storage facility will hold items for up to 6 months. Plenty of time to make decisions. After we hung up, I wandered through the house again, mentally cataloging possessions. The expensive dining table Rebecca had insisted on, would I want to keep that, with its memories of uncomfortable family dinners and whispered cruelties? The oversized sectional sofa in the living room, where Michael had often sprawled to watch sports while I sat in the adjacent armchair, our conversations growing increasingly superficial over time. The designer bedding in the guest rooms, the high-end appliances in the kitchen, the artwork chosen more for its value than its beauty. None of it felt like mine, really. All of it had been selected by Rebecca, paid for by me, but never truly reflecting my tastes or preferences. Perhaps it would be better to start fresh. To create a space that was authentically mine, not one shaped by others' expectations and desires. The moving company arrived promptly at 7, 3 efficient men who worked quickly to catalog the contents of the house. I walked them through each room, indicating what should be stored and what could remain for now. By 9 o'clock, they had loaded several pieces of furniture and numerous boxes onto their truck, leaving behind only what I needed. Immediately, my bed, a small table and chairs for the kitchen, my desk and chair, in the study, basic kitchenware and linens. As they drove away, I stood in the driveway, looking back at the house. It seemed different now, less imposing, less perfect, but somehow more honest. A house in transition, just as I was a man in transition, moving from one chapter of life into another, uncertain but unburdened. Inside, I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the small kitchen table, the only furniture remaining in a room that had once been outfitted like a showcase. The silence wrapped around me, not oppressive now, but contemplative. For the first time in years, I had space to think, to feel, to simply be without managing others' expectations or needs. That night, I slept dreamlessly deeply, the sleep of someone who has survived a storm and found themselves still standing when the clouds cleared. The next morning, the locksmith arrived as scheduled. I watched as he changed every lock in the house, handing me new keys when he finished. Such a small thing, changing locks, but it felt monumental, the physical manifestation of closing one door and opening another, of securing my space against those who had planned to take it from me. The day stretched before me empty of obligations or expectations. I could do anything, go anywhere. The freedom was almost dizzying after years of structuring my life around Michael and Rebecca's needs and schedules. I decided to start with breakfast at a local cafe I'd always enjoyed, but rarely visited because Rebecca preferred trendier establishments. The hostess greeted me with a warm smile, recognizing me from infrequent past visits. "Just yourself today, Mr. Morris?" "Yes, just me." And the words felt strange on my tongue, but not unpleasant. Just me. Seated by a window with a view of the street, I ordered coffee and an omelet, watching the morning bustle outside, people hurrying to work, parents walking children to school, an elderly couple strolling hand in hand down the sidewalk, life continuing in its ordinary, extraordinary way, regardless of personal dramas and familial ruptures. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "All accounts updated. You're the sole authorized user now. How are you feeling today?" I considered the question. How was I feeling? The anger that had fueled me through confrontation had subsided, leaving behind a complex mix of emotions. Sadness, certainly. Loss. A lingering sense of betrayal. But also, surprisingly, something approaching peace. The clarity that comes from seeing situations and people as they truly are, not as you wish them to be. "I'm okay," I texted back. Taking it one day at a time. One day at a time. It was the only way forward through this strange new landscape of my life. Each day, a step further from betrayal, and closer to what healing reinvention? I wasn't sure yet, but I was willing to find out. After breakfast, I found myself driving to a familiar spot, the cemetery, where Sarah was buried. I hadn't visited in several months, busy with the mundane details of supporting Michael and Rebecca's lifestyle. The guilt of that neglect weighed on me as I made my way through the quiet paths to her grave. The simple headstone bore her name, the dates of her birth and death, and the words we had chosen together, beloved wife, mother, friend. I placed the flowers I had bought at the cafe on the grass before her stone and sat down on the small bench nearby. "I've made a mess of things, Sarah," I said quietly. "Tried so hard to keep our family together after you left that I couldn't see what it was becoming. Couldn't see that Michael was changing, that our relationship was breaking down. You would have noticed. You always saw things more clearly than I did." The cemetery remained silent, except for the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. No divine answers, no ghostly whispers of guidance, just the peaceful presence of memory and love that endured beyond death. "I don't know what happens next," I continued. "Don't know if Michael and I can ever rebuild what we've lost. Don't know what my life looks like now without the role I've been playing for the past 3 years. But I do know I'm not going back to to being taken for granted. Not going back to being valued only for what I can provide. You wouldn't want that for me, and I finally realize I don't want it for myself either. I sat there for a long time sharing my thoughts with Sarah's memory, telling her about Rebecca's plot, about the guardianship petition, about the nursing home brochures, talking through my anger, my hurt, my confusion, asking the questions that had no answers. How had our son become someone capable of such betrayal? Where had I gone wrong as a father? What would she have done in my position? By the time I left, the sun was high in the sky, and something had shifted inside me. Not healing exactly. It was too soon for that. But perhaps the beginning of acceptance. This was my reality now. A life without my son's daily presence, without the illusion of family that I had clung to so desperately. A life I would need to rebuild on my own terms. 2 weeks passed in a blur of small decisions and adjustments. I replaced Rebecca's modern art with paintings I actually liked. I converted one of the spare bedrooms into a reading room with a comfortable chair and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. I found a contractor to renovate the kitchen, removing the cold, clinical aesthetic Rebecca had insisted on in favor of something warmer and more inviting. Each change, however small, was an act of reclaiming my space, my identity. I reconnected with old friends I'd neglected during my years of focus on Michael and Rebecca, meeting for lunches and dinners, rebuilding connections that had withered while I was pouring all my energy into a family that didn't value me. Some of these friends had never liked Rebecca, had seen what I couldn't, her manipulation, her sense of entitlement. They welcomed me back into their lives without judgment, without, "I told you so," simply glad to have their friend return from what one of them gently called the Rebecca years. A month after their departure, I found an envelope that had been pushed through the mail slot. My name was written on the front in Michael's handwriting. For a moment, I considered not opening it, protecting myself from whatever justifications or accusations it might contain. But curiosity won out, and I tore open the envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a brief note. "Dad, this doesn't come close to repaying what we owe. But it's a start. It's from my personal savings. Rebecca doesn't know I'm sending this. I understand if you want to tear it up, but I hope you'll see it as a first step toward making amends. I love you, Michael." The gesture caught me off guard, touching something deep and vulnerable inside me. It wasn't the money itself. $5,000 was indeed a drop in the bucket compared to what I had spent supporting them over the years, but the fact that he had sent it at all, that he had dipped it into his own savings, acted independently of Rebecca, made a concrete gesture toward acknowledging his debt, both financial and moral. I sat down at my desk, the check and note before me, and considered my response. My first instinct was skepticism. Was this just another manipulation? A ploy to soften my resolve to open the door for reconciliation on their terms rather than mine. But the fact that Michael had sent it without Rebecca's knowledge suggested something else, a genuine attempt, however small, to begin separating himself from her influence to take responsibility for his own actions. After some consideration, I picked up my phone and texted him, "Received your check. Thank you. It's acknowledged and appreciated." Short, neutral, neither rejecting his gesture nor rushing to forgive based on a single act. It was all I could offer at this point. His response came quickly. "Thank you for not tearing it up. There will be more. Monthly, as much as I can manage." I didn't reply. Didn't want to encourage expectations of rapid reconciliation or forgiveness, but also didn't want to dismiss what appeared to be a genuine attempt at amends. Time would tell whether this was a momentary gesture or the beginning of real change. And I had time, to wait to observe, to protect myself while leaving open the possibility of something new emerging from the ashes of what had been destroyed. The weeks that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. I met with a real estate agent to discuss potentially selling the house, not making any decisions yet, but exploring options. I called old friends I had neglected during my years of focus on Michael and Rebecca, reconnecting over lunches and dinners. I researched travel destinations, allowing myself to dream of adventures that had seemed impossible just weeks before. A week after I received Michael's check, I got a text from him. Found an apartment, small but affordable, starting a second job to make ends meet. Just wanted you to know we're not imposing on Martha anymore. Again, I kept my response simple. Good to hear. Take care of yourself. Another week passed. The locksmith returned to install a security system. David's suggestion, a precaution against Rebecca trying to return with the story about my supposed cognitive decline. Better safe than sorry, he had said, and I had agreed, though the thought of needing protection from my own daughter-in-law was still surreal. 3 weeks after their departure, another envelope arrived from Michael. Another check, smaller this time, $1,000, but still meaningful, given that he was now supporting himself entirely for the first time in years. The note was brief. Second installment. Found out Rebecca was hiding a credit card with a $15,000 balance that you were paying without my knowledge. We're separating our finances completely. I'm sorry for not being more aware. This revelation wasn't surprising. I had suspected Rebecca of financial deception, beyond what Michael knew, but his acknowledgement of it was significant. A sign that perhaps he was beginning to see the full scope of how they had taken advantage of me, beginning to recognize his complicity through willful ignorance, if not active participation. As the weeks turned into months, I continued to receive Michael's checks and brief updates. He and Rebecca had separated, he told me. The revelation about the hidden credit card had been the final straw, coming after weeks of tension and blame as they adjusted to their reduced circumstances. I'm seeing things clearly for the first time, he wrote in one note. How I let Rebecca convince me of things that weren't true. How I chose the easy path of believing her rather than standing up for you. How I valued comfort over integrity. I don't expect you to forgive me anytime soon, but I want you to know I'm working on becoming someone worthy of forgiveness. I didn't respond to these notes, but I kept them tucked away in my desk drawer, not as evidence or leverage, but as markers of a journey. His journey toward accountability. My journey toward healing. Whether these paths would ever converge again remained to be seen, but for now, it was enough to know that we were both moving forward, however hesitantly, however painfully. 3 months after the Christmas confrontation, I found myself sitting in a cafe in Tuscany, a dream fulfilled at last. Sarah and I had always talked about visiting Italy together, but work and family obligations had always seemed to take precedence. Then her diagnosis had come, and international travel had become impossible. Now at last I was here alone, yes, but free to explore at my own pace, to honor her memory, by living fully, in a way I hadn't allowed myself to do since her death. The small piazza bustled with activity. Tourists snapping photos, locals going about their business, children chasing pigeons across the cobblestones. I sipped my espresso and watched it all, feeling more at peace than I had in months. Not happy exactly, the wounds were still too fresh for that, but content in a quiet, contemplative way. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, reluctant to let the outside world intrude on this moment of tranquility. But curiosity won out, and I checked the screen. "Dad, this is Michael. I wanted you to know that Rebecca and I are separated. We're getting divorced. I've realized a lot of things about myself and about our marriage that I should have seen earlier. I'm living in a small apartment and working 2 jobs to make ends meet. It's hard, but I'm learning to be responsible for my own life for the first time. I don't expect you to respond to this, and I'm not asking for help. I just wanted you to know that I'm finally understanding what you tried to teach me. I hope you're happy and at peace. I love you." I read the message twice, then set my phone down and returned to my book. The message didn't change anything. Too much damage had been done for a simple text to repair. But it suggested that maybe someday there might be room for a different kind of relationship. One based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The sun was setting over the Tuscan hills and painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I raised my wine glass in a small toast, not to Michael's message, not to the future, but to this moment, to the peace I had found in being true to myself, in refusing to accept less than I deserved, to the knowledge that being alone with dignity was infinitely better than being surrounded by people who saw me only as a means to an end. For the first time in years, I was home, even though I was thousands of miles away from the house where I'd been betrayed. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was the peace that came with knowing my own worth and refusing to accept anything less from others. I had paid dearly for that lesson, but it was worth every penny I'd lost and every relationship I'd sacrificed to learn it. Some prices are worth paying, and freedom from those who would exploit your love is the most valuable purchase of all.